that power doesn't come for free. It demands the sacrifice of the person closest to you. Right off the bat, that is a chilling warning, isn't it? Those were the exact words spoken by a grandfather to his young grandson during these warm, starry nights in a remote Indian village. Now, it was just supposed to be a warning, a scary story to tell in the dark to keep the kids in line. But decades later, those exact words would become the horrific, inescapable reality of a modern, highly educated corporate worker living in Delhi. Welcome, everyone. Today we are unpacking a truly unsettling explainer that bridges the gap between a modern psychological breakdown and an ancient, terrifying superstition. So let's dive right into our investigation of the anatomy of a curse, the Karn Pichashini case file. We're looking at the story of a man named Vishal. Driven by just the sheer, intense pressures of the modern world, he reached into the absolute darkest corners of ancient Indian occultism. According to tantric folklore, what he actually summoned is called the Karn Pichashini. It's a highly specific, invisible, and just deeply malevolent force. The word literally translates to ear goblin or ear demon. Basically, its primary function is to whisper absolute, undeniable truths about the past and the future directly into the summoner's ear. It gives you the power to know things you couldn't possibly know, bringing immense wealth and success overnight. But, of course, there's a catch. This is a deeply transactional entity. Unlike traditional spiritual practices that require purity, fasting, and cleanliness, the Karn Pichashini demands the exact opposite. It demands absolute impurity, filth, and degradation.
Now, you might be wondering, why on earth would an educated, science-minded guy like Vishal even entertain something like this? Well, it really comes down to the psychology of desperation. Extreme corporate burnout, the sudden, terrifying shock of poverty, the feeling that you're just failing everyone around you. Those pressures can completely break down anyone's rational defenses. Vishal had hit absolute rock bottom. He lost his corporate job, he was drowning under a mountain of crushing debt, and to make matters worse, the family of his fiancée Geeta, the woman he loved more than anything in the world, had completely rejected him because of his financial ruin. He was spiraling into severe depression. The source material notes that a failing man often turns quickly to blind faith. It makes Vishal's descent something we can intellectually understand, even if the result is absolutely terrifying. It was in this incredibly vulnerable state that Vishal remembered his grandfather's stories and just started scouring the internet for forbidden ancient texts. The ritual he eventually found is known as the Pact of Impurity, or Apavitrata Kakarar. The mechanics of this Faustian bargain are highly specific and completely inverted from any normal religious practices. First up, Vishal had to strip the room of all holy symbols. Second, he had to lock himself in a room that had been left to gather rot and filth for days. Third, he actually drew esoteric, occult symbols on the floor using coal and his own blood. Finally, he had to chant specific dark mantras deep into the night of an Amavasya, which is a moonless night. Our source actually describes how Vishal, sitting there in the dark, almost gave up halfway through. He felt kind of foolish for abandoning science. But, unfortunately, he had already set the wheels in motion. So he tries to go to sleep, but suddenly the atmosphere in the room shifts violently, just attacking his senses. Vishal experiences a sudden drop to freezing temperatures, which was entirely unnatural for the season. Then came this suffocating, overwhelming stench. It was a mix of rotting meat and feces that literally made it hard to breathe. When he opened his eyes, illuminated just by a faint street lamp outside, he saw a towering figure in the corner of the room. Its arms hung all the way down to the floor, its hair was matted with mud, and horrifyingly, its body was twisted completely backward. The face was looking directly at him, featuring two glowing sulfur-red eyes. And then, at exactly 3:13 a.m., he felt a hot, damp breath on his left ear. The whisper sounded like a little girl, but laced with just immense cruelty. The entity gave him its core condition, whispering, "I don't like purity. The dirtier you are, the more your wishes come true." Vishal, completely paralyzed by fear, but blinded by his sheer desperation to get Geeta back and secure his wealth, agreed to the terms. He walked right into the trap. And guess what? The very next morning, the entity delivered. Out of nowhere, he was offered a high-paying corporate job at triple his expected salary. And Geeta called to say her family had miraculously changed their minds. They were getting married. The curse had officially begun its work.
This bizarre dual life Vishal was forced to live is just completely jarring to think about. On the one hand, Vishal projected this pristine illusion to the world, right? A massive salary, a highly successful career, and a happy marriage to Geeta. They even moved into a posh, brand new apartment together. But behind closed doors, his putrid reality meant he was entirely enslaved to the entity. He had to keep his old, original apartment in a state of absolute, rotting squalor. To receive the secrets that fueled all his corporate success, he had to secretly sleep in that filthy room, breathing in the awful stench of decay, letting the entity touch him and whisper into his ear for hours on end. The stench of the entity literally seeped into his skin. It was an odor so foul that absolutely no expensive cologne could ever mask it. But as we all know, secrets like this just cannot be kept forever. Geeta, noticing Vishal's strange hours and that lingering foul smell on his clothes, started getting really suspicious. One day, she secretly followed him to the old apartment. When she walked in, the sheer filth absolutely shocked her. Thinking she was just being a supportive wife, she grabbed a broom, opened the windows to let the sunlight in, and attempted to clean the secret room. Instantly, the entity screamed into Vishal's ear with deafening animalistic rage, threatening to literally rip Geeta apart for bringing light and cleanliness into its domain. To stop her, Vishal had to physically attack his own wife. He violently twisted her arm and screamed at her in this deep, unnatural voice to get out. So the marriage completely fractures, but Geeta's suspicion only grew stronger. On a stormy, rain-swept night, she decided to follow Vishal once again. She crept up the stairs and peered through a crack in the door of that rotting apartment. What she saw completely shattered her mind. She didn't find her husband having an affair. Instead, illuminated by a sudden flash of lightning, she saw Vishal lying on the floor with a massive, dark, long-armed entity sitting directly on his chest. Its glowing red eyes snapped toward the door, staring right at her. Terrified completely out of her mind, Geeta sprinted down the stairs and ran blindly out into the stormy streets, where, tragically, she was struck by a speeding truck, putting her into a deep coma. With his wife now on life support, Vishal completely broke down and confessed everything to his best friend, Rahul. But Rahul, who was very much a man of science, offered a very different diagnosis for what was going on. He argued that Vishal was simply suffering from severe corporate burnout and chronic sleep deprivation. He rationalized that the crushing guilt of his wife's terrible accident had triggered an extreme grief-induced psychosis. According to Rahul, the rotting smell, the red-eyed figure, those horrific whispers, they were all just intense auditory and visual hallucinations created by a severely sick, traumatized brain. He begged Vishal to go see a psychiatrist. But Vishal knew better. He knew science couldn't explain the horrifying reality of his terror. Feeling rejected by his only friend, Vishal returned alone to his pristine, empty new apartment. Then, the hospital called to tell him Geeta was failing on the ventilator. And right at that exact moment, all the lights in the apartment violently shut off. The entity had followed him. It cornered him right there in the dark and issued its final ultimatum. It demanded absolute possession of Vishal, his mind, and his new home. It demanded he turn this beautiful, pristine space into a rotting pit of filth, just like the old room. And if he refused, it promised to stop Geeta's breathing at the hospital immediately. The timeline of this final night unfolds with just terrifying precision. At 11 p.m., Vishal returns to his flat and the supernatural phenomena kick in. By 1:30 a.m., completely broken down and begging for his wife's life, Vishal surrenders completely to the entity. He allows it to take total possession of his mind, leading to a frenzy where he literally destroys his own home. And then we hit the absolute climax of the curse. At exactly 3:13 a.m., despite being hooked up to a ventilator, Geeta's heart simply stops beating at the hospital. And at that exact same minute, 3:13 a.m., Vishal's life also ends in his apartment. The next morning, Rahul and the police break down Vishal's door. The crime scene they discover is nothing short of chilling. That beautiful apartment had been turned into an absolute hellscape. Furniture was smashed to pieces, and fresh occult symbols were drawn all over the walls in blood. And there, on the bed, lay Vishal. His eyes were wide open in sheer terror. But you know what the most horrifying detail was? His own hands were locked tightly around his own neck in this staged suicide. The police found him strangled by his own grip, and the entire apartment was radiating that same unnatural, horrific stench of rotting meat and decay. So the absolutely crucial detail here is this exact number, 313. It was the exact time the entity first manifested and whispered in Vishal's ear in that dark room all those weeks ago. And it was the exact minute that the curse claimed both of their lives simultaneously. His grandfather's horrific prophecy from the very beginning of this explainer was fulfilled with terrifying precision. That power doesn't come for free. It demands the sacrifice of the person closest to you. The pact of impurity was sealed and the debt was collected in full. Which brings us to our final, lingering question. Was Vishal simply the tragic victim of a severe psychological breakdown? Did the stress, sleep deprivation, and crippling guilt cause him to hallucinate a demon, destroy his own home, and tragically take his own life in a fit of severe psychosis? Or did the ancient, dark folklore hold true? Did the Karn Pashashini cross over, lured by the pact of impurity, to exact its inescapable deadly price on a man who dared to manipulate the darkness for his own personal gain? It's a structured collision of mind and myth that makes this case file so deeply unforgettable. Thank you so much for joining me as we unpacked all this. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.